Hey there! Moving the h-pawn 2 squares forward in the opening is something that's becoming increasingly common, particularly in games played by top players. So in today's video we're going to analyze some positions to understand the main ideas behind this pawn push so that you can use them in your games. So the first direct idea of going h4 white or h5 by black is to activate the rook. But going h4 straight away will not activate the rook easily because white cannot force an open h-file. But after a move like e4, if black goes g6, here we get a modern defense. The main move for sure is the move d4, the most natural move, fighting for the center. But the move h4 here makes a lot more sense than the previous move. Now white wants to go h5 using the g6 pawn to open the h-file. This is what we call a hook that will allow white to open the h-file. And here black has a few options. In the game that I selected, black played the move bishop to g7, which is quite natural continuing with the development, but we could definitely see other options. A move that I like here is to go d5, counter-attacking in the center. This is a common reaction. If one side plays on one side of the board, the other side plays on the center, or the other side of the board. But black could prevent this idea by going h5. This is possible, although in this case, white will gain more control of the g5 square. Or another idea is to go h6, and after h5, planning to take and activate the rook on h1, black would try g5, although in this case, white is still achieving something because white is gaining some space on the king side. So I'm not claiming that white is gaining a clear advantage in any of those cases. This idea is interesting to try, and very often the side going for these ideas is trying to avoid main lines. That's why h4 is an alternative to d4. And in the game that I selected after bishop to g7, let's see the game a little bit to learn some ideas that might come after h5. Here black went c5, d5 was also interesting, counter-attacking on the center, but here black already has to be a bit careful to avoid having a bad position. Knight to f6 might look like a natural developing move, but white has another idea. Instead of opening the h-file, which would not achieve a lot in this particular position, black will simply trade and we would trade rooks. The move h6 here is quite annoying because this will kick back the bishop and black will have problems to develop on the king side. So after h5, black went c5, and after knight to c3, it's better to keep the tension for white. Black went knight to c6, and after bishop to c4, now black went e6, planning to develop the knight to e7. So after knight to f3, knight to e7, d3, h6 might be playable in these positions, but the bishop can go to f6. And in the game, black finally went d5, counter-attacking in the center, and we got a very interesting position with chances for both sides. So this idea of an early h4 against black playing g6 can be played in other openings, for example after d4, knight to f6, c4 and g6. Here knight to c3 planning to go e4 is by far the main line, but white has also tried the move h4. One idea being that after d5, if black wants to go for the Grunfeld defense, white can take, and after knight takes, white can go for h5, planning to activate the rook on h1. Now let's see another position where white also goes for this h4 idea. We get the hook on g6, and by the way, if you want to learn more about hooks, I have a separate video about it that you might want to check the link in the description. So here white went for the move h4, and black went for knight to f6, seemingly preventing the idea of h5, but sometimes white can even sacrifice material to break the pawn structure. Here white went h5, black took on h5, if black castles, now white is ready to take on h6. Now we get an open file. White will plan to castle long and try to attack the king on g8. So black took on h5, and here white played this very interesting sacrifice by taking on h5, and after g takes and queen takes, white gave a full exchange, but white has better development, great control of the center. White will castle long. Black actually has to be a bit careful. Castling short here will be very dangerous. White is ready to bring the pieces to the attack. Bring a knight to g5, after castling long, bring the rook to h1. So that's why here black went e6 and focused on developing on the queen side. And even though the game ended in a draw, white had great chances in this game. Now another reason to push the h-pawn 2 squares forward is to gain space and create some weaknesses. In this position it is white to play. A move like knight to f3 is a very natural developing move that can definitely be played. Queen to g4 is another interesting idea, attacking the pawn on g7, although here black might try knight to f5, ready to kick the queen with the h5. White's bishops are already quite active on their initial squares, that's why here white tried the very interesting move h4. Planning to gain space on the king side, there might be some ideas to activate the rook with the rook lift as well. And after queen to c7, h5, here black went h6. The main point is that after a move like bishop to d7, h6 will try to either activate the rook, or after g6, now we see that black is creating some weaknesses on his camp. So after h6, white went rook to b1, and after b6, now finally white played the move queen to g4, putting some pressure on g7. So with this pawn push, white managed to gain some space and restrict black's pieces. Another reason to push the h-pawn might be to simply trap an opponent piece. Let's see this idea with an example. After e4 and c6 we get the Caro-Kann defense, and after d4 and d5, e5 is one of white's main lines, and after bishop to f5, here white could definitely go knight to f3, but the move h4 has been tried in this position, also setting up a trap. Because after bishop to f5, a very common idea by black is to go e6 and then c5, trying to counterattack the center, but in this particular position the move e6 is actually quite bad. Instead black should reply with h5, because after e6 and g4, white is going to trap the bishop. It can go to g6 or e4, but after h5, bishop to e4, and f3, white is going to end up winning a piece. The h-pawn can also be pushed to attack and misplace an enemy piece. Let's see this with an example. As we see, in all cases, you should have a concrete idea, otherwise we're not going to waste time with the move h4 or h5. So here after the move e4, c6, d4 and d5, knight to d2 is another option in the Caro-Kann for white, and after d takes and knight takes, here black also has many options, but knight to f6 is an interesting move for black. And here white normally either takes on f6, doubling pawns, or white goes knight to g3. And in this position, one interesting idea for black is to go h5, planning to go h4, attacking the knight. The knight on g3 might look a bit passive, but is controlling f5. Black would love to develop a bishop to f5. So after h5, if white plays something like bishop to c4, developing, black can go h4, attacking the knight, and after the knight moves, now the bishop can go to f5, and black has a perfectly playable position. Now after h5, white can definitely go h4, and in return both sides will get some nice squares for the pieces. For example here, black could go bishop to g4, developing and attacking the queen, and if white plays something like f3, the bishop can retreat, and now we see that the knight on g3 is going to be loose. So after queen to c7, this will attack the knight. So overall the move h5 here is quite an interesting alternative for black. Now having said that, we should not play h4 or h5 blindly. For example, in this position, which might look very similar, the move h5 is actually not that good because white can neutralize that threat with development, so this should normally be an alert for us. Here, instead of going h4, white could also go bishop to g5, just developing and preventing the move h4 by black, so black is actually wasting time by going h5. Now another very different reason to push the h-pawn is to simply prevent your opponent's idea. So this is more about prophylaxis. Here in this position, which is a position that has been played a lot in the Sicilian defense, black could definitely go bishop to e7 to castle, although white's idea is to go g4 either straight away or after castling long. So that's why here black very often prevents white's idea. In fact, this is the most common move, which is h5, preventing g4 or at least making it harder for white to play it. Now the minor drawback might be that black is wasting a move to prevent that, and now g5 can be used for white's pieces more easily. The move h5 here is a very useful move to prevent white from expanding on the king side. And before I move on with the last position, if you want to seriously improve at chess, I have a free course that will provide you with a training plan for that, so feel free to check the link in the description. And that situation is a very strange and more advanced case, which is to help develop your pieces. Besides trying to activate the rook, which is the main idea behind the pawn push, the idea is to support a piece to develop. So here in this position, it is white to play a move like bishop to e2 or bishop to e3, knight to f3. Those are definitely the most natural moves. For example, after knight to f3 and bishop to b7, white wants to go bishop to g5, developing and attacking the queen, although here black's idea is to take on f3, which attacks the queen. Here white can take on f3, attacking the rook, and after the trade, we get a fairly playable position where white has two bishops, although white's pawns are a bit weakened. but instead white went h4, planning to develop the bishop to g5 with the support of the pawn h4 instead of the knight. So here after bishop to b7, bishop to g5, queen to f5, and bishop to d3, black went queen to a5, and here white went king to f1. White's play is definitely original. The king is going to be safe on f1, white has a lot of pieces covering the king, and the rook might develop through h3, and here black correctly continued developing. Otherwise, after queen takes, white will go knight to e2, attacking the queen, and then the move rook to h3 will follow, so white will gain a very serious development advantage. So instead black went knight to c6 and then went f6 and long castle. So even though this move h4 was quite original and interesting for white, black managed to hold the game. So you learned a lot of ideas to use the move h4 and h5, so I hope that you can use them in your games. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.